Thanks everyone for attending tonight's webinar. It is May 27th, 7 o'clock. We have Dustin Snyder here from the Spruce City Wildlife Association. Same format as usual. His presentation will probably be about 30 to 40 minutes, then we'll go into Q&A. If you have questions, put them in the chat under or in the Q&A box. And if you're coming in from Facebook Live, just put them in the comments section and we'll address them. Dustin is one of our hardcore volunteers who spends, probably more time volunteering and trying to take care of fish and wildlife than certainly than the average person, and more than I think his, family and work maybe even would like. He's an extremely dedicated person. I've known him for about 10 years, and certainly we've been well aware of all the work that Spruce City has done in terms of their attempts to conserve Chinook in the Upper Fraser. And so Dustin has lived in Prince George for about 17 years. He's a restaurant manager as a day job. He's married with 2 kids, enjoys spending time hunting and fishing. He's not a big, I think you've done a bit of salmon fishing, but not a ton. He's really only got involved in salmon conservation out of a sense of responsibility. So his motivations here are really not around fishing, it's around fish conservation. In terms of the club up there in Prince George, Dustin oversees the operation of the most technologically advanced volunteer-run hatchery in the province. It is the only volunteer hatchery which is permitted to work with both threatened and endangered Chinook stocks, and at one time was even permitted to run a conservation hatchery program on a functionally extinct stock, which is something no other volunteer group has done. So, we're all well aware that there's tons of controversy around hatcheries and hatchery augmentation. This webinar is really showing what some of our clubs do. And in this case, I think you'll see through Dustin's slides, the fish in the Upper Fraser definitely need all the help they can get. When we're talking about single-digit fish in some streams which are extinct, there's not a whole lot we can do. So Dustin, thanks for everything you do. And we appreciate the club and all of the work that you do and all of the restoration work and work on behalf of the province and on behalf of DFO. You all fill a huge gap in Northern BC. So I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you very much, Jesse. I appreciate it. Thank you guys for having me here. And I've put together this presentation to go over the role of hatcheries in helping salmon in BC. Again, too, this is really focused on the conservation hatchery program that we run here at Spruce City. I know that, as Jesse said, there is some controversy around kind of the larger scale and massive production that happens out there and some of the massive facilities and that sort of thing. But that's not what we do here at Spruce City. And some of the details we're going to go through, I think, will kind of alleviate some of those concerns. So Jesse gave a bit of an introduction there, but just kind of go through Spruce City really quickly. We were founded in 1970, so we've been around for just over 50 years. Spruce City actually started salmon enhancement in 77, originally started operating out of a brewery where they were raising salmon, then an abandoned pump house, and in 1986, the hatchery that I'm sitting in today was built. Spruce City runs a membership of approximately 200 people, mostly in the Prince George area, but we do have folks from the surrounding area that buy membership as well. And we are 100% volunteer run, and we're the only volunteer Chinook hatchery north of Kamloops in the Fraser watershed. As Jesse mentioned, we are the most technologically advanced volunteer facility in BC, and we're the only volunteer group that works with both threatened and endangered Chinook stocks simultaneously. We'll go through some more of that afterwards. Again, so I'm Dustin Snyder. I'm the president for Spruce City. I'm a restaurant manager. This is just my side gig. I do this for fun. I was born and raised in a small town, Burns Lake. I'm married and I have 2 kids. And as Jesse said, I would love the opportunity to fish for salmon. But I think standing on the riverbank with a rod, I more so would make a fool of myself. So that'll be down the road. I'm involved with salmon conservation up here because when I learned of how low some of the stocks were and the issues that they were facing, this seemed something that I felt that I could jump in and get my feet wet, so to speak. So first off, just to kind of, loop everybody in, for those of you that don't know or kind of just tuning in to learn, what is a hatchery? So a hatchery is a facility that collects brood stocks. So essentially that means you go out to a stream, you find salmon, you collect milt, which is sperm, and the eggs from salmon stocks, and you carefully raise them in a hatchery. So hatcheries can have a variety of purposes. Hatchery fish are raised in the facility and then released back into their natal stream, where the brood stock was collected. That way, then the hatchery and the wild offspring will co-migrate from there. So this isn't completely kind of a natural selection doesn't happen. Those fish are raised in the facility and then released. And again, too, in our facility, we're looking at matching wild as closely as possible. So when I'll go through it in a bit here, actually, so that I don't say the same thing multiple times. So reasons for a hatchery. Why would you need a hatchery? Why would you want a hatchery around? One of the reasons is support stock assessment programs. So Canada does have domestic and international obligations. People need to know where fish are at, where fish migrate, where they're at in the open ocean, who's catching them, that sort of thing, as well as where they're returning and how many are returning. So fish are sometimes produced for those stock assessment programs. Another one is harvest opportunities. Of course, we all like fishing. We all want to be out fishing. So fish are created in hatcheries to be released for the sole purpose of being caught. Another one is community involvement and education, getting people involved, getting people's hands on fish. The picture on the left there, that's one of our community releases where we have people come down to the hatchery. We do an open house. And it's quite amazing, even though we're here on the banks of the Nechako River, confluence with the Fraser is right nearby. There's a lot of folks that don't actually know that salmon are around or that salmon exist in this area. The nearest spawning ground can be a couple hours away for salmon, so there's not really a lot of viewing opportunities to see those fish. And again, too, the Stream to Sea program is a good one. For those of you that don't know, the Stream to Sea program is where kids get to raise salmon in their classroom. They get to see the whole life, all the life stages, and then they go down to the river and they release those fish as well. And then lastly, conserve and rebuild vulnerable salmon stocks. So that's what Spruce City is doing here. All of the stocks in the Upper Fraser have been classed as endangered, and the ones in the Nechako have been classed as threatened, with some of those stocks mixed in being designated as functionally extinct, which pretty much means there's still fish returning, but without some sort of intervention, those stocks are highly unlikely to ever rebuild themselves, even in perfect conditions. So we work with Chinook salmon. I always like to say your local stocks. We're all part of British Columbia. This is our province. These fish are my fish, your fish, everybody's fish. So we work with Chinook, which are the largest species of salmon. They'll return to spawn in a 3 to 6 year life cycle. Our local runs here in the Upper Fraser are a 5-2, which means they have a total lifespan of 5 years, and they'll spend 2 of those years in freshwater. Some of the stocks up here have been identified as critical habitat for the southern resident killer whales. They return as males, females, and the odd jack. And again, too, COSEWIC has designated them threatened, endangered, and functionally extinct. So why the need? Why are we doing this? I could be spending my time doing something else. So why do we need to be running a hatchery up here? Number one is the lack of government resources. So to give DFO a little bit of credit, which I don't do very often, there has been some new resources popping up here in the last couple of years. When we first got involved and when we first got our facility going, there was nobody. There was, I think there was one person in the office besides the fisheries officers, and that was the community advisor who was, helping with engagement and community support and that sort of thing. As I mentioned, the salmon appear long lost and forgotten. There's folks that remember being able to fish salmon up here, but there's only a handful of them. For viewing opportunity and that sort of thing, there's not a lot up here. I would say there's borderline zero. a lot of people who live in the Prince George area or in the Upper Fraser, in the Nechako area, that sort of thing, everybody pretty much heads to the Skeena or heads to Vancouver. That's where you go to do your salmon fishing. You know, we've reached a point here in this area where we don't really have anything left to lose. It's already gone, it's already been taken away, and we're kind of running a flat line. Rising water temperatures, climate change, pollution, poor ocean health, obviously all of those things play a factor. And all of those things are causing salmon to return up here in smaller numbers, or smaller sizes, sorry. So when you get a smaller size fish, you get what's called a lower fecundity. Fecundity is how many eggs they have. So when you have less fish showing up smaller, holding less eggs, you kind of end up with a spiral downwards. Obviously, these are a keystone species. They're an integral part of the food chain. Everything wants a piece of that pie. Another one up here was the Big Bar landslide. I'm sure everybody heard about the Big Bar landslide. So big waterfall was created right around the Big Bar area, caused a complete blockage for a significant number of fish. So those Upper Fraser fish that were already classed as endangered, it's estimated over 50% of them the year that Big Bar happened died, as well as some of the mid-Fraser ones as well didn't make that passage that year. And so this year has now been 5 years since Big Bar. One of the streams that we work on, which is Swift Creek, the year Big Bar happened, it's I believe the count for Swift Creek was 3 Chinook, and we're not sure male, female, what that was. So again, when we're looking at a stream that has had upwards of 1,000 to 1,200 return, you know, a couple decades ago in really good years, and now we're looking at a year where there's only 3. We're not even confident that we'll be able to get broodstock this year from that river, which one of those years out of the 5-year life cycle is kind of out of the mix. Lastly, a lack of data. There's no one here to collect it. That was pretty much it for the longest time. Again, too, we've started to get some DFO staff up here. So there is some conversation happening now, but there's a significant lack of data on a lot of these streams, even with regards just to enumeration. Some rivers up here haven't been enumerated in over 2 decades. So that really leaves you with where could you go? What habitat work could you do? Could you form an enhancement program on a certain stream? In a lot of cases, nobody can really even tell you. On top of that, it's a lot of the area up here is remote. So between Prince George and the very top of the Fraser, say if you were to go to Mount Robson, we have McBride, which is a small community, and we've got Valemount, which is a small community. And from here to Valemount, you're about a 3.5 hour drive, depending on the day. There's a lot of kind of ground out there that there's no community out there that can really cover that or that could handle that. And same sort of thing with the DFO office being in Prince George. It's quite a reach for fisheries officers, for biologists, for anybody. So I'll answer the question. Can we fix a salmon population issue with a hatchery? No, I don't believe so. There's a lot more to it. Hatcheries should be seen as part of the solution, not the fix. This is something that this can be ointment under the Band-Aid, but you still need the whole Band-Aid. There's habitat that needs to be looked at. You need to ensure that there is adequate habitat. You can go dump fish in a river, but if they don't have anywhere to live, obviously you've got a problem. Same thing with feed. There needs to be adequate food for the number of fish. That stream and that habitat needs to be able to sustain a certain number of fish. Their migration route and what they're going to encounter. Salmon, in a lot of ways, it's kind of death by 1,000 cuts. There's a lot of things that aren't making the situation better, but that isn't the #1 problem. Migration route and the things that they encounter out there in the ocean, predation, that sort of thing. There was a recent article out about a trawler picking up a whole bunch of Chinook salmon, that sort of thing. Is that the #1 problem? No. Is it making it better? No. So again, kind of this death by 1,000 cuts. There's a lot of issues that need to be worked on simultaneously. But when we get into a situation where we're looking at very low double-digit numbers and single-digit numbers in streams that should be able to hold thousands, we need to take drastic action. So again, predation, whether that's the ocean, river, people, whether it's an overharvesting issue or anything like that, overharvesting by people, bears getting into streams, eagles, again, everybody wants a piece of the salmon pie. Watershed health is another big one that, people tend to kind of zoom in and focus right on the salmon themselves, but it definitely helps to zoom out a little bit, see what the forest looks like around that river. What kind of runoff are we seeing? What's freshet look like? What's the water temp in the summertime? We had one river up here last year or the year before where it was getting to 22 degrees at night. And that's unbearable for any kind of fish. On top of that, monitoring, whether this is monitoring the stream or the watershed itself, but monitoring those fish, making sure you're paying attention to the impact that you're having with the hatchery, what's coming back, what you're putting out, the size, making sure that you're putting out healthy fish, ensuring that you're not putting out fish that have disease and that sort of stuff. So monitoring the effects that you are having with the hatchery itself. So what are we doing? What is Spruce City doing in the hatchery? So I've added this one in here because I think it's interesting. We haven't been able to do it recently because of funding issues, but collecting milk for cryopreservation for future use. Having some of that genetic sample on hand that you could use in the future, I think is something that, maybe would be good to have in our back pocket. What we're doing as well is we're enhancing low stocks, but for the purpose of conservation and rebuilding. So again, too, these stocks are severely depressed. We're looking at giving them a boost, throwing some more fish out there, and ensuring that those fish are enhancing the population with as little negative impact as possible. We are monitoring river temperatures under the gravel, so we're actually digging false reds in some areas and burying tidbit temperature monitors in there to use that to dictate what we're doing in our hatchery. So we have chillers and whatnot in our facility that I'll go through later, but we're trying to match the river as close as possible to ensure that we're raising fish that, again, aren't going to compete with wild. We want to match wild. This year here actually in the picture, those are two Chinook. The one on top is one from our hatchery, and the one below was captured in the river as we were doing the release. So that's kind of what we're looking for. You can see ours has a little bit more of a gut on them, but we're looking to match wild as much as possible to ensure that we're not putting out fish that are going to either outcompete wild or that are going to eat the wild fish or anything like that. We're meeting with stock assessment from the Department of Fisheries to discuss coated wire tagging and clipping up here. We really need to get a better handle on where these fish are at, where they're migrating and that sort of stuff. Again, too, because there hasn't been anything really done up here since the hatcheries up here were closed, say 20 plus years ago. We need that information. We need to know how many are returning. We need to know the impact we're having. We need to know if they're being caught in the river, in the ocean, in the trawl fishery, where they're ending up all over the place. We need to be able to know that. So we're meeting with stock assessment to start some of those conversations. Advocacy is another one. We've had a lot of politicians, government staff here into the hatchery, bring them through what we do, invite them to our releases. We've also had meetings in Kamloops, Vancouver, Victoria, and we've even gone out to Ottawa once to have meetings with folks out there to discuss the population issues and the problems that the Upper Fraser faces. Another thing that we're doing in the hatchery is we need to be constantly evolving. So how it's always been done isn't something that we like to use. That's not a statement we use. We like to look at what could we be doing better? How can we change? What's changing in the environment that we need to change in our facility to again, try to be able to match that as much as possible. We want to release our fish really small to, again, ensure that we're matching the wild fish. The fish in that picture were both right around 1 gram. I think 0.9 and 1.1 or something like that. So again, too, we want to be able to match that. We want to make sure that we're releasing them at an early enough stage to where they're going to imprint on the stream so that they'll return back to the right stream. How it's always been done and taking science from other areas, taking coastal science and trying to apply it to the Upper Fraser is just going to get us into problems. We need to get that information up here that is relevant to the area that we're working in. So what's the difference for a conservation hatchery? So one of the big things is protection. So protections in the facility. We have 3 different alarm systems that monitor our facility. We have 2 or 3 different backup pumps. We have backup aeration. We have all kinds of stuff. Losing endangered fish because of something that happens in a controlled environment is an extremely unfortunate situation. It's an unfortunate situation to lose any fish in a controlled environment, any hatchery. However, when we're going out to a stock that is already extremely depressed, having a negative impact like losing some of those fish in our facility is much more devastating. Consideration for genetic diversity. So this is one that a lot of people get concerned about, is kind of that genetic dilution of hatcheries. So in the picture that you see there, we've taken a small female, we've divided her eggs up into 4 containers, and each one of those containers gets fertilized with milt from a different male. So we will matrix spawn up to 6, which means, again, instead of breaking that one into 4, we would break it into 6. And each one of those containers would get fertilized with a different milt. So this increases the genetic diversity. We will reuse some of that milt with different females. But again, too, we'll make sure that, we're always spawning at least 2 to 1. We never spawn 1 to 1. So one male will never spawn all of the eggs from one female. We like to keep these batches as small as possible, again, just to ensure that genetic diversity. Our biosecurity in the facility too is I've heard from a lot of folks, unmatched. We have specific boots inside of our facility. You're not allowed outdoor footwear. Everything is sterilized every time. We don't actually bring tours through our facility itself. We have some fish in a tank that are outside of the hatchery itself. Those are the fish that we bring people through and look at on tours and that sort of thing. Hand sanitizer before you enter, everything. We just keep everything as clear and as clean as possible. And again, too, none of our brood stock ever enters the facility. We do egg takes riverside. And then each one of those containers, like the containers you see there of eggs, all of those are completely disinfected on the outside before they're passed through the door into our facility, just to, again, make sure that we're not bringing anything from the riverside into our hatchery. So just to touch on that cryopreservation again, this is something we did for a couple years. We were working with a really awesome lady. Her name's Maureen from Canada Cryogenetics. She was helping us with this sort of thing. So we were collecting the milt, labeling it. You can see in the top left-hand corner there, we were labeling for white Chinook, red Chinook, and each one of those numbers on there, 1, 9, and 8, that would tell us what male it was, and that would correspond to an adipose punch that we did for parental-based tagging. We would ship it down to the coast where she would do motility testing just to make sure that milt was still viable by the time it got there. And as long as it was viable, it would end up in liquid nitrogen for storage. Our facility, so recently we've had some major upgrades. These are some of the upgrades. Our facility was originally built in 86, 87, and then expanded in 93, 94. It was good, but again, too, the way hatcheries ran up here back in the late 80s, early 90s was, again, very focused on kind of a coastal science. So some of our old paperwork here at the hatchery even says that, raising the fish up here at 9 or 10 degrees all year long is perfect because you can end up with a smolt-sized fish by May, which, again, too, as I just said, we don't want a smolt-sized fish. We want that 1 to 2 gram fish is kind of the target that we're shooting for. So part of our upgrades included commercial chillers, again, backup chillers, pumps, aeration tower, the whole works. All of that was redone. We have fail safes. We have a backup generator that runs our whole facility. We have 3 wells. We also have a river intake that we can use. via pump. We have a backup aeration system so that in an event that none of those pumps or wells work, we have an aeration system built into the facility. And again, too, we have all kinds of alarms. Everything is 24-hour on call, and like I said, there's 2 of everything. So even with our water filters and our UV sterilizers, we have 2 of them just in the event that one stops working. Instead of trying to swap one out, we just flip a switch and start using the other one. One of the big thing with our facility was learning curves. So there isn't really any baseline data for a conservation hatchery from the Department of Fisheries, especially once you start to involve volunteers. So we ask a lot of questions. There's not always a lot of answers. But again, too, we're kind of doing something that hasn't been done in an area where nobody's done much. So all that to say is that we use the data that's available, but some of this is kind of figuring it out on our own or with the folks that are here, because we don't confidently have somebody that we can rely on to answer all these questions for us. So with the upgrades, we use what's called a recirculating aquaculture system, which means we can reuse a bunch of the water, which saves us some money down the road. So all of our water is biofiltered as well as UV sterilized before it goes back over the eggs. And again, too, once it goes over the eggs, then it goes through the chiller and the filtering system all over again. In the bottom right-hand corner, those are aeration pods because, again, we need oxygen in the water. So while we're recirculating it multiple times, we want to make sure that there's enough oxygen in there for all of the eggs and all the fish that we're raising. Partnerships. Partnerships is a big thing, especially when we don't have a ton of folks up here. So working together with other folks towards the same goal. So Carrie-Sicanner Tribal Council, this was a really cool partnership. This is the functionally extinct stream that we worked on for a couple of years. So CSTC had been working on the Indaco River for over 20 years, doing monitoring, doing some habitat work, so on and so forth. Essentially what happened is they had been asking the Department of Fisheries for a hatchery program, very small scale, but just something to give the stream a bit of a boost. We had a facility, they had the knowledge on the stream, they knew where the spawning beds were, we knew how to run the facility, and it just worked out very well. So we got permission from the Department of Fisheries, and we worked with Carrie-Sicanner on this project for 2 years, I believe. Sharing the work made the job much easier for everyone. So we didn't have a lot of fish fence experience at the time, but Carrie-Sicanner did. So they taught us how to build fish fences. We worked with them and built those fences. Once the fish were trapped, they weren't sure how to extract milt or eggs. So that's when we stepped in and again, kind of just shared the workload. This is one of those things too, where again, that cryopreserved milt. So about 20 years ago, CSTC had seen the Indaco already starting to kind of peter out. So they had cryopreserved milt about 20 years ago. And we actually, the 1 year that we ran the hatchery program, we reintroduced some of that cryopreserved milt from 20 years ago. So those genetics that potentially had been long gone were reintroduced. And again, to just kind of ensuring that genetic diversity within a stream, to where, again, runs used to be upwards of, I believe, 300 to 500. And a really good year right now for the Indaco River is low 30s. In Valemount, we're working with the Simp First Nations in Swift Creek. They send folks every year to help us with the brood capture. They help with the release. Again, it's a great partnership. They have a lot of fisheries folks with some experience who are more than willing to make the trip up to Valemount and help us out for a couple days. And again, it just lightens the workload on everybody if everybody can put in a little bit of work. So for our capture methods for the hatchery, we use both fence and trap as well as tangle and gill net. Depending on the size of stream and depending on where we're at, those don't always work. Obviously, a large river like the Nechako, you wouldn't want to build a fence and a trap because it's massive. One thing that I will note, though, is endangered stocks make it much more difficult and much more intensive for brood captures. Depending on how many fish return, when you have a super large river like the Nechako, where the spawning grounds can range upwards of 20 plus kilometers, you can't always target the same area. We like to be able to target the same area, but depending on how many fish show up, the one year I think we only had 300 or 400 fish show up in the Nechako River. So finding those fish, you can spend a lot of time just scouting. You can do a lot of net sets and come up with nothing. And it can be very very depressing sometimes, but you know, we're in this to make things better, and so you got to have hope. You got to look at the upside of things. Um, for smaller streams, the fence and the trap is definitely the way to go, especially too, since those smaller streams, you're looking for smaller numbers. So um, sometimes a really good spawning spot in a smaller stream will only be four fish. And when you're looking for, you know, 10 or so, you know, catching them one here and one there, again, it's very labor intensive. And where we're going, like I said, it's a lot of these places are very remote, so you don't always just have an easy spot to drive up to the side of the river where you can capture the broodstock. Just in brood capture alone, Spruce City puts in over 500 hours a year, and that's just for brood capture. That's just to get the eggs into our facility. This is always fun just to kind of see the life cycle from the hatchery side of things. So middle picture and picture on the left, taking the eggs in the milt. Once we get the eggs back to the hatchery on the bottom left there, they're counted and weighed. Right smack dab in the middle on the bottom, that's fertilized eggs where we've added the milt and then added water. In our facility, we always say bubbles mean babies. So once you add the water, you'll kind of see that water almost foam up. Then on the right-hand side, we've got the eyed egg, the alevin, and then ponding just below that. And very bottom on the right is the release. And that release is actually the upper Nechako. So another important thing that we do is we'll take DNA and genetics from every single fish. So we get that through an adipose punch. We also take kidney samples looking for bacterial kidney disease. And we've started taking the otolith as well and submitting that to the DFO lab in Nanaimo. So what Wattman sheets and milk tracking, what that does is that will give us an idea, because currently we're not marking these fish in any physical way. This will give us an idea of what we've captured years down the road. So when we submit this data to the Department of Fisheries, they log it all. And if a few years from now, say 5 years from now, we submit more genetic samples, they should be able to give us a call and say, hey, this fish that you had, fish number N6, was actually came from so-and-so 5 years ago, and they'll know what fish. It's called parental base tagging, PBT. So again, too, within the hatchery, we watch these fish very closely all the time. We're constantly monitoring, weighing, looking at health, shape, size, that sort of thing. So for feeding, it's not as easy as it sounds. You can't always just throw food at these things. In nature, there's never enough. That's why fish are always excited to, chase food, grab food, that sort of thing. So we only feed to about 80% of our food calculation. So if the food calculation says we should feed 100 grams, the max we'll usually feed will be 80 grams. Too much food will make a slow, sluggish fish, and again, unable to compete in the wild. We don't want to put something out there that is twice the size of normal, that is used to being spoon-fed. We want to put something out there that is competitive and feisty, and again, too, will be able to fend for itself once released. We check the weight and length of a sample of fish each week, and we'll adjust the food amounts as needed. Sometimes we'll also adjust the flow. If we see that our fish are getting a little bit too chunky, we'll cut back the food and turn up the flow, kind of throws them on a treadmill for a little bit. And again, too, we're capturing wild fish at the same time through minnow trapping to be able to compare to the size to make sure that we're matching as close to possible as the natural ones. We've also moved to auto feeders. We used to feed by hand all the time. We had volunteers come in all the time and hand feed. Although that's a good way to get an idea of how well the fish are feeding, one thing that we found after a while was that the fish were getting very used to us. They were almost coming up to you like a pet. So you'd walk up to the trough and go to feed, and the fish would rise up to you. Now, since we've moved to auto feeders, we load all the feed in there. We do a small hand feed in the morning, again, just to make sure that we can get an idea of how well they're feeding. With the auto feeders, the fish don't want any part of people. As soon as you go over to the trough and look in, they hide to the bottom, they swim to the opposite end. And again, too, although it doesn't feel as nice that they don't come up to you, we know that that's what's best for them. Health, size, and shape, again, too, we will do, sometimes it's called a condition coefficient. So this will kind of calculate how healthy the fish are. And again, too, we don't want them too healthy. Too healthy usually means they're a little bit overweight. This is kind of based on a fish that you would catch, kind of how well that fish is doing in the wild. So again, too, we want to put something out right around the fair condition. We don't want something that is big and chunky, but we also don't want something that has been starving. Hatch timing is dependent on water temperature. So again, too, we have a lot of temperature monitoring equipment within our facility and in the river to be able to match those up so that, again, we can kind of align where things are landing so that we can get an idea of the proper size and proper timing for those fish to be going out of our facility. So that's what we're doing in the hatchery. What are we doing outside of the hatchery? I just told you in the very beginning of this that the hatchery won't fix all of our problems. So what are we doing outside of the hatchery? Again, too, the fry trapping, not only to check the size at the release for our facility, but also to assess passage. There's a couple areas around the city where we've found that fish can't get through. On the outskirts of the city where there's some passage barriers, whether they're culverts or crossings or that sort of thing, making sure those fish have access and available habitat. We are doing a bit of habitat work as well. We're not fully engaged, but we're starting to dabble for sure. So for a couple of years, we've been monitoring a couple side channels, doing assessments, as well as looking for funding on how we can do restoration work on those as well. We've also started a program this past year, which is really cool. We're doing some remote enumeration. What we're doing there is we're building a fence in the river and putting a passage box in. Inside of that passage box, we've got an underwater camera that is motion activated. So as fish swim through the box, we get a short video of it. Again, too, this is very labor intensive and we have to get pretty creative because we're working in areas where there's no cell service, there's no power. This isn't something we can just plug in and have those pictures emailed to us every night. We have to make a trip out there every couple days. It's a 2.5 hour drive to where we were working. And on top of that, we were running everything off of a few solar panels. So again, too, that can come with its own problems as well. But the stream that we enumerated last year, that was the first time that stream had been enumerated in, I believe, 23 years. Again, too, we're monitoring river temps and flows, not just for hatchery's sake, but just to see where things are at. We're building partnerships, not only with First Nations, but other community partners, community engagement and education, whether it's through our fry release or tours throughout the facility or engaging in different kind of public forums and that sort of thing. Funding, seeking funding, all nonprofits, we're all seeking funding. Everybody's looking for funding. We all got to pay the bills. If we want to do good work, we need the money. And again, too, like I was saying, collecting data. A lot of these data deficient areas like the Upper Fraser, you need to get data. Really, in some cases, no matter what that data is, whether it's the temperature, whether it's how many fish are coming back, all that stuff. Because again, in the areas that we're working, some of the best data we have, or the most recent data we have, sorry, is from the mid 80s at best. And I think we can all agree that the world has changed a lot since the mid 80s. And no different than within the facility, constantly evolving. Again, as the issues evolve, we need to as well. We need to keep an eye on what's going on out there, how we react, and again, how we can kind of make a difference while things are changing. With the facility, we've done a lot of learning the hard way, and it's not always fun. So just here's some pictures of our facility kind of throughout the years as we've grown. So we did have 2 years with zero success. Our facility sat empty, which again too is upsetting for volunteers. But once we take on a new stream, it usually takes us a couple years to find where they spawn, the best way to catch them in that area, and that sort of thing. Late night alarm calls from small changes. Sometimes you would come down and just tweak a certain handle the right way, thinking that you're adding a little bit more water. And unfortunately, then an alarm goes off at 2 o'clock in the morning and you have to come down and fix it. Frozen lines. So when we upgraded our facility, when we got a bunch of funding and did all the upgrades, we had some great folks come up from the South Coast and help us renovate the place and that sort of thing. We didn't know exactly what we were doing or what we were looking at, but one concern that a southern hatchery can have is making sure that it doesn't get too warm. One concern that a northern hatchery needs to have is that it doesn't get too cold. So again, we had some burst pipes, we had some flooding issues and that sort of stuff. And again, constantly evolving. As the issues happen, you got to fix them and keep going. Deciding what we want to do, how we want to do it, and how to get there. Again, with the lack of resources up here, the lack of data, coming up with a plan and then trying to execute those plans. Budget concerns, again, like I said, funding. There's our hydro bill in the bottom right when in 2019. So we were running about $2,000 a month for hydro for a while there with all of our chillers and everything. Biosecurity needs, being able to source these things in an area where hatcheries aren't really popular and how to get them up here. Everything has an added cost for shipping. And again, to figuring out what is needed. So our hatchery wasn't upgraded all in 1 year. We've kind of slowly upgraded every single year for, say, the last 6 years. Because again, to every time we came up with something, there was one more backup plan that we should have in place or one more thing that was needed. Again, sourcing in an area that isn't the Lower Mainland, hatcheries isn't something that happens up here. So whether it is certain piping or certain pumps or something like that, it's everything has to come from a different area. And again, a few fish can result in a lot of work. So we have this big facility. Our maximum capacity is 120,000. We have run our full facility for 2,000 fish because that's all we got that year. And in the off season, we're doing repairs, whether it's fixing nets or cleaning up the facility or that sort of thing. But I will say it's very rewarding. Educating the public and political figures. A lot of people are shocked when we talk to them about how low some of the fish populations are up here. Bringing the family along, the picture on the bottom left there, that's my daughter counting salmon eggs in the hatchery. Brood capture is a lot of fun. We have turned it into, because again, too, the closest place we do brood capture is about 3 hours away. We turn it into a camping weekend. So, a lot of us kind of bond a lot. You bust your butt all day on the river capturing brood, and then you can sit around the campfire and have a cold drink at the end of the day. Releasing the fry is very rewarding. And for some folks that have got involved, almost an emotional experience because you're going into a stream where there is so little and they do need so much help. Releasing so many fry all at once, I don't know, it hits you right in the feels. Community stewardship, involvement in education, again, to just getting people from all walks of life involved, getting them caring about the river, about the fish, and being able to see that, long term, there could be some really positive benefits if we can bring these fish back, not just for the local area, but the entire province. All up and down the coast, having more Upper Fraser fish would be beneficial, the entire river, whether it's for, again, all the other natural predators, the forests at large, the fishermen, so on and so forth. We need these fish to be returning in larger numbers. Oh, and conservation for future generations. That's a slogan that Spruce City came up with a few years ago. We know that what we're doing right now likely won't benefit us. I know that all of the work that myself and the team here are putting in, we likely won't be able to hit the river and go fishing for salmon anytime soon for ourselves. But I have hope that maybe I'll be able to go with my kids or my grandkids, or maybe they'll be able to go after I'm gone or something like that. But at the end of the day, if we don't put in the effort, if we don't take care of what there is or try to make it better, the future generations don't stand a chance. So that's all I've got. Thank you all for your time. And I think Jesse is going to open it up to some questions.
Way to go, Dustin.
Thank you.
Awesome presentation. We had a couple of questions earlier, but they were easy peasy. If anyone has any questions on Facebook or on Zoom for Dustin about all of the work they do, that would be great. Yeah, Dustin, I think you did an awesome job.
Thank you.
And I think you're just at this stage of the game, all you're getting is compliments. No questions.
We'll take that as a good thing.
Yeah. Yeah. Let's see if there's anything in here. No answered questions. No unanswered questions. Well, we'll give it another 30 seconds and maybe you've captured the audience here. And I see that Steve's watching on Facebook, so maybe he has a question. Here we go. Have you explored stocking from other sources?
No, that's not something that we have explored. There was a little bit of that when Big Bar first hit. That was something that the Department of Fisheries dabbled in. Again, too, because when they were capturing some of the brood stock at Big Bar for the emergency enhancement programs, they were ending up kind of with a mishmash of fish from here, there, and everywhere. So what they did is they had created certain areas, again, with certain watersheds. So just like, let's say the McGregor, for example. So there's a lot of different tributaries to the McGregor.
Mm-hmm.
What they did is they took all of those fish that went up the McGregor and they created kind of one pile of fish that they would then raise and stock in those tributaries to the McGregor. That's not something we've done here. Again, knock on wood, we've been pretty lucky with where we're after brood stock. But we're just hoping that the impact that we're having is going to give them enough of a boost where we don't have to kind of import from other streams.
Awesome. Here's one. Have you experimented with any in-river hatchery boxes?
We had that discussion with the department a few years ago, and that wasn't something that the department was overly interested in. I know that there was some work done with them in other areas. I believe the one was called a Scotty box. Some of the issues with the Scotty boxes was in areas where there's a lot of sediment, those would plug up. And if you didn't keep the box clean, kind of disturbing it constantly, that those holes in there where the water is supposed to go through would actually plug up and the eggs would end up dying. Not saying that they don't work. I'm sure that there's other options, but one thing that we did discuss with the department is that it would have to be in a deeper area or they'd have to be buried quite substantially just because of how cold it gets up here. And the ice on some of the streams can freeze the stream darn near solid sometimes. Some of our temperature tidbits that we have buried in the gravel still only register like 0.5 of a degree in January. So you'd have to really bury some of those incubation boxes.
Gotcha. One question, how can we donate?
Awesome. Hey, I like that question. You can visit our website, scwa.bc.ca. And yes, thank you very much. We would appreciate any donations we can get. Helps us keep the lights on and helps us do more.
All right. Question. It sounds like you have a very robust system that tries to mimic nature as much as possible. What would you say about the effects that other hatcheries have, which do not try to mimic nature as much on wild salmon populations?
So yeah, that's one thing to where even for myself, it's been a little bit conflicting. There definitely is, I had somebody send me some videos of I think it was like a Russian hatchery of some kind, and they had female after female after female, pretty much into a 5-gallon bucket. All of these eggs went into one pile, and they grabbed 2 or 3 males and just as much milk as they could throw in there, and they dumped some water in there, gave it a stir, and away they went. Definitely, I think that is not necessarily the way we should be doing things. Again, too, this constantly evolving. If we know that there is a negative impact or could be a negative impact, we need to adjust. We need to evolve our practices and change things up a little bit. For some of the production facilities, I can understand, because if you're putting out 1 million fish, it would be very hard to matrix spawn all of those. it takes us a few hours sometimes, even if we're just doing 40,000 eggs, to be able to split them all up, matrix spawn them, mix them back together, put them into incubation. So I can understand from an efficiency perspective, but I think long term, you know, adjustments need to be made in some of these facilities to ensure that we are doing the best we can.
Yeah, it's awesome. And we also have quite a few webinars now on hatchery augmentation and on the effects of epigenetics as well as genetics too. So folks can check out our YouTube channel. I think we've had three other webinars with some pretty high level research. This is Vancouver Island related, so I don't know if this will be outside of your bailiwick or not. On Vancouver Island, we have many different river systems throughout the island. Would it be possible to have a central facility to supply multiple systems with fry? Would it need the native river water? Can they be marked to the river after?
So yeah, I can relate to that a little bit, just because again, to where our facility is, we've run as many as 3 rivers, 3 different sets of broodstock out of our one facility here in Prince George. We've done the Upper Nechako, we've done Swift Creek and the Bowron River all at the exact same time. Again, too, we can adjust the temperatures on each one of those stocks differently and separately. Again, too, my thing would just be that I believe anyways that those fish need to be released at an early enough stage that they can still imprint on the stream. Sometimes that means smaller than is recommended kind of by the BC Hatchery Handbook. But we use well water here as well, so we're not pumping in from any river, any stream, so there's not really any opportunity for them to imprint on a different stream because we're not bringing river water in, we're taking from a well. So once we go put them back in the river, again at a very young age, that's kind of what our hope is, or that's what we're doing there. So I think that you could probably have one central facility that you brought eggs to and then brought them back, again too, as long as precautions were taken and like used well water instead of taking from a stream. I think there's potential to confuse the fish there.
Awesome. What temp do you keep the eggs, and do you try to combine hatch dates using temperatures?
So what we do is once we get the eggs into the facility, we'll start to cool them down kind of sooner than the river would cool down in nature, just because we can't get our water in the hatchery as cold as the river can get. We would freeze up solid. So we usually get them down to maybe 6 or 7 right off the bat, and then we'll keep them there until they get to about an eyed stage, or just give that a pull. Get them to the eyed stage or where they're just starting to hatch, and then we'll drop them down, and we've got them as low as say 2.5 or 3 degrees, and we'll hold them there pretty much until they're ready to pawn, and then we'll start to warm it up again. Again, we know that this isn't matching the river exactly, but we're kind of trying to shoot for that end target. So one thing I didn't explain is ATUs. So accumulated thermal units is how we measure kind of how the fish are developing in the hatchery. So each day, what the temperature is, you add that to the previous day, and you just keep doing that the whole time they're in your facility. So if we believe from egg to fry in the river is 1,000 ATUs by a certain day, we'll try to match that 1,000 ATUs in the hatchery again for that same time frame.
Okay, and following up on ATUs, who monitors the ATUs?
So those are monitored by us. So in the facility and in the river, we have our tidbits that we'll pull from the river, and then that's where we download that info and kind of add it all up onto a spreadsheet. In the hatchery, part of our big upgrade was monitoring equipment. So we have all of that stuff is logged into computers. We also have apps that we can access the information from our phones kind of whenever, wherever. And yeah, so but aside from all the computer stuff, we still do the old school. Each day somebody comes in and looks at the temperature, writes it down on a piece of paper, and adds it all up, just so that we can kind of ensure we've got the backup plan should anything crash on us.
Awesome. And then we got a couple of questions from Steve. How did you figure out that cryo was done 20 years ago?
So that was actually just kind of a luck of the draw sort of thing. So we were working on the Indaco with CSTC, and essentially they said, "Hey, we've got some of this stuff. I don't know if we could use it." And quite bluntly, with our First Nations partners that we were working with, we said, "Well, if you want to use it, these are your fish, and it's just our facility. You're welcome to give it a shot." So they gave it a shot, and again too, we didn't really get any approval for that. We didn't get any thumbs up from any superior person or biologist of any kind. And I think there was some choice words for us from the Department of Fisheries afterwards. But hey, they survived in the hatchery. They made it to fry. It worked. It did the trick.
Awesome. What did the hatchery look like when the doors first opened a few years ago to where it is now?
So when the doors first opened, I think we had to like smash the doorknob off the hatchery in order to even get in. When this place shut down, they pretty much turned it into a storage unit. All of the handles on the valves were all rusted shut. There was nobody left even really who knew how to turn the water on and off. So the folks, Steve, myself, and the handful that were involved in the very early days, we were starting right from scratch. We had a facility, it was old and it ran, but even just turning the lights on was something that nobody had been done in, say, over a decade, 15 years, that sort of thing. So what it looks like now is we've put over, I would say, over $500,000 into the facility. We have state-of-the-art monitoring equipment. We have all kinds of pumps, backups, technology, generators, the whole works. So I think my wife and I have even talked that if the end of the world comes, the hatchery ain't actually a bad place to be.
Who's the contact for cryo?
Her name is Maureen. I'm forgetting her last name, but she works for Canada Cryogenetics.
Okay.
And she's done quite a bit of work on the coast, on the island, as well as up here. We've worked with her, and she's working quite a bit with the Department of Fisheries and some of the First Nations groups up here as well, doing the crow preservation.
Okay, and people want to know your email. We share that for Spruce City?
Sure. Sure.
Okay. Okay, we'll share that. All right. Here we go. Do you provide artificial lighting for feeding times?
So we do have the lighting kind of come on and off as we kind of match it with sunrise and sunset sort of thing. So we do have the light come on just because we are like a fully enclosed facility. We do have a couple windows, but even on a sunny day, it can be pretty dark in there. So we do have the lights come on and again start dim and then get brighter, and then whoever comes in at the end of the night and cleans the feeders and puts everything away shuts off the lights when they leave.
Awesome. Awesome. Okay. Any other questions? Oh, there's two here. We got that one. What's your Spruce City email?
Spruce City Wildlife, all
Yeah.
one word, all lowercase,
Yeah.
at gmail.com.
Okay. Awesome. Well, that's an hour, Dustin. Great work. We are always very appreciative of all the work you do, and this is just a very small part of it. Actually, they do tons of backcountry cleanup, done a ton of moose project work in the past. It's an extremely active club, definitely leading by example. So really appreciate you coming on, sharing some of your precious time with us. Keep up the great work. Our next conservation webinar is going to be with Dr. Clayton Lamb on Elk Valley study that looked at elk survival and migration. Actually, that was put together in part by the Sparwood Club. Spent a ton of time and money trying to organize that. So we will have confirm a date and a time for you for June. Thanks everyone for tuning in. We really appreciate the support. If you learn anything, you now have Dustin's contact information. If you have questions for him, please feel free, and have a great evening.
Thanks very much, Jesse. Thanks everybody for coming out.
Thanks, Dustin. See ya.